Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to provide you with an update as to what's happening with Russia's gas sales. Now, Russia has the largest natural gas reserves out of any country in the world. It's sitting on around 24% of the total global supply. And when you compare that to countries like the USA, who's sitting on 5%, and Australia, which has 0.5%, you would expect Russia to be doing very well in terms of liquefied natural gas sales. But unfortunately, from Russia's point of view, over the last 30 years, they got a bit lazy. The Russian authorities decided that the easiest way to monetize all of the gas sitting under the ground was to build pipelines and sell it directly to Europe. However, following the invasion of Ukraine, the majority of European countries decided that they no longer wanted to buy that Russian gas, and that decision has left Russia with a huge hole in its income because the world is now looking for liquefied natural gas. That's the main commodity that everybody needs, and unfortunately from Russia's point of view, they haven't been building the facilities that would enable them to convert the gas that's sitting under the ground into liquefied natural gas. So in today's video, I'll have a look at what's been happening with Russia's natural gas sales because they've fallen dramatically. We'll then have a look at what's happened to their liquefied natural gas sales in 2023 because they've actually fallen year on year, despite the fact that everybody wants liquefied natural gas. We'll then have a look at what's happened in the liquefied natural gas market in 2023. We'll have a detailed look at the Russian facilities that currently exist and talk about the cost of Russia actually building more of these facilities and who's likely to fund that cost, because historically Russia has relied on the West to come in and put most of the cash into these projects and also design and build them for them. And then finally today I'll wrap up with my summary as to what the implications of what's happened in 2023 are for the Russian economy and what's likely to happen over the course of the next 12 to 24 months. But before we get started on all of that, once again, I'd like to say thank you so much to everybody that supported the channel. If you bought me a coffee, sent me a YouTube super thanks, or signed up as a Patreon or a YouTube member, thank you so much. I really appreciate your support. Historically, the majority of Russia's revenue earned from natural gas sales came from selling that gas via pipelines to both Europe and China. Russia, in conjunction with European countries, had constructed 6 pipelines: the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines that were supplying gas directly into Germany, the Yamal pipeline that supplied gas to Poland and Germany, the Brotherhood and Soyuz pipelines, both of which travel across Ukraine and deliver gas into Central Europe, and the Turkstream and Tanap pipelines that deliver gas to Southern Europe through Turkey. In addition to the European pipelines, Russia also constructed the Power of Siberia pipeline, which supplies natural gas directly to China. In 2022, Russia supplied 79 billion cubic meters of natural gas through all of these pipelines. 80% of that was delivered directly into Europe and 20% to China. In 2023, as a direct result of the continuing sanctions against Russia and also the continued move from European countries towards liquefied natural gas rather than Russian pipeline gas, there was a 56% fall in the amount of gas supplied directly from Russia into Europe. Now, Russia did manage to offset this slightly with a 45% increase in the amount of gas being sold directly to China, but the overall impact on the amount of gas being supplied by Russia via pipelines was a 36% fall to 50 billion cubic meters. But unfortunately, from Russia's point of view, in addition to the reduction in the volume of gas provided, there was also a huge impact on its revenue as a result of a huge fall in the price of gas. This chart shows the movement in natural gas prices over the last 5 years. And you can see that immediately following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the price of gas skyrocketed and increased from around $3.70 to more than $9. And if you look at the whole period of 2022, gas prices remained elevated and the average price was around $7. If we now look at what's happened to gas prices in 2023, you can see that they are significantly lower. And the average price during the course of the year was around $3. So what Russia experienced during 2023 was a 36% fall in the volume of gas, but a 60% fall in the price of that gas. And the combination of those two factors had a massive impact on Russia's P&L. So the obvious thought process here is that if Russia's gas sales via the pipelines were falling and there was an increased demand for liquefied natural gas around the world, then all Russia needed to do was convert more of its gas into liquefied natural gas and benefit from the boom in that market. But unfortunately, from Russia's point of view, that didn't happen in 2023, and the volume of its liquefied natural gas sales actually reduced. This chart shows Russia's liquefied natural gas exports, provided by the two biggest gas companies in Russia, Gazprom and Novatek, for 2022 and 2023. The Yamal field is Russia's biggest single liquefied natural gas facility, and as you can see, in 2022, Russia sold 20.8 million tonnes of LNG. However, in 2023, that figure dropped to 18.7%, which represents a fall of more than 10% year on year. And interestingly, when you look at the breakdown of where that reduction in sales came from, there was a reduction of 8% in volume sales to Europe and a reduction of 12% in Asia. The Sakhalin II facility, which is based on the island of Sakhalin close to Russia and Japan, also saw a fall of 10% year on year between 2022 and 2023. And the fall in volumes seen by these two major facilities were offset to a certain extent by an increase in Russia's smaller LNG facilities. And if we now look at the total change in volume purchases, you can see that between 2022 and 2023, Asia purchased 11% less LNG, whilst the reduction in Europe was only 2%, and Russia's total volume sales year on year reduced from 33 million tonnes in 2022 to 31 million in 2023, representing a fall of 6%. So surprisingly, the reduction in volume sales to Asia is actually having a bigger impact than the reduction of sales to Europe. So let's now have a detailed look as to what's been happening in the LNG market. This chart shows the year-on-year movements in global LNG imports dating back to 2019. The scale on the left-hand side of this chart is measured in millions of tonnes and goes from 0 at the bottom to 450 million tonnes at the top. And the two different colours on the bars we've got here, the dark green section represents the volume of global LNG imports for the period between January and October, and the lighter green section is for November and December. And the reason that we've got a split is that the data for November and December 2023 isn't yet available, so we're looking at a year-on-year comparison here. In 2019, the total amount of LNG imported globally was 337 million tonnes. That figure remained broadly flat in 2020. However, 2020 was the year that was heavily impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. We had lockdowns all around the world, and as a result of that, a lot of industry closed down for a period of time. So that explains why demand remained flat. In 2021, the global demand for LNG increased to 360 million tonnes, and it increased further in 2022 to 390 million. However, if we now look at 2023 and compare what's happened against the first 10 months of 2022, you can see that there's actually been a reduction in the amount of LNG being imported. And at first glance, that might seem a bit surprising because we just talked about the fact that the amount of gas being bought via pipelines has reduced significantly. So you would have expected a commensurate increase in the amount of LNG. However, a lot of countries are trying to move away from fossil fuels. They're developing their renewable energy sources such as solar and wind and hydro. And as a result of that, despite the fact that natural gas sales via pipelines has fallen significantly, we haven't seen an equally large increase in LNG demand. And that's obviously bad news for countries like Russia, who are trying to monetize their natural gas. If we now have a look at which countries were the largest importers of natural gas in 2023, you can see that the European Union, which actually represents 27 individual countries, is the biggest single importer, importing around 70 million tonnes in 2023. Now, in terms of comparing that level against what happened in 2022, you can see the previous year figure is represented by the gold diamond here. And what this shows is that year on year, the amount of LNG that the European Union is importing has remained flat. So there hasn't been an increase despite the fact that there was a 56% reduction in the amount of pipeline gas being exported from Russia to Europe over the same period. And this proves that the European Union is making a conscious effort to move away from using fossil fuels. China was the second largest importer of LNG in 2023, importing just under 60 million tonnes, which represents a slight increase against the volumes from 2022. Japan is the third largest, with around 55 million tonnes, and as you can see, this represents a fall of around 10 million tonnes against the figure from 2022. South Korea is the fourth largest importer of LNG, importing around 37 million tonnes, which represents a fall of around 5 million tonnes year on year. And if you have a look at the other 7 countries shown on this list, you can see that 5 of them, Taiwan, India, France, the UK and Spain, have reduced the amount of LNG that they've been importing year on year. And the only countries where there's been a slight increase are the Netherlands and Thailand. So which countries are the largest exporters of LNG? This chart shows the 11 biggest exporters in 2023, and as you can see, the USA now holds the number 1 slot, and in 2023 exported just under 70 million tonnes. The USA was closely followed by Australia at 65 million tonnes and Qatar at 63 million tonnes. And interestingly, both of those countries actually saw a reduction year on year in the volume of LNG that they were exporting. Now, interestingly, Russia comes in at number 4 on this list, with total volume exports of around 20 million tonnes, which is only around 10% of the combined volume of the USA, Australia and Qatar, which is coming in at around 200 million. And when you consider that Russia is sitting on 24% of the world's gas supplies, compared with 5% for the USA, 12% for Qatar, and 0.5% for Australia, it really highlights the fact that the lack of investment into LNG is hurting the Russian economy. And if we look at the year-on-year changes in LNG exports in 2023, you can see that the only 3 countries that increased the volume that they exported were Mozambique, the USA and Norway. And as we discussed earlier in the video, Russia actually reduced the amount of LNG that it was exporting. Now, I thought it'd be interesting at this stage to have a look at the destination of the US LNG exports over the last 5 years. And what it shows is that firstly, there's been a large increase in the total volume of LNG that the USA is exporting. And secondly, the biggest single buyer of the USA's LNG is now Europe. You can see that following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the black section of this chart has increased hugely. And this chart shows a detailed breakdown of where the European Union and the UK are purchasing their LNG dating back to 2019. And if we look at the figures for 2023, you can see that 52% of all LNG is now coming directly from the USA. The next biggest supplier is Qatar with 15%, followed by West Africa at 12%, Europe itself at 7%, and Russia comes in at number 5 with only 6%. This chart shows where China is buying its LNG from, and if we look at the figures for 2023, you can see that 36% is purchased from Australia, 25% from Qatar, 12% from Russia, and 11% from Malaysia. And if we look at the breakdown of where Japan is buying its LNG, 45% is coming from Australia, 14% from Malaysia, 10% from the USA, and only 9% from Russia. So you may be thinking, well, why doesn't Russia just ramp up its liquefied natural gas capabilities and start selling a lot more into the international markets? And in order to answer that question, I thought it was worth having a look at the biggest LNG facility in Russia, which is based in Yamal. And as you can see from this photo, this plant is located in a very cold part of Russia. So that represents a challenge in itself. But in terms of developing more of these facilities, Russia is facing multiple challenges. Firstly, there's the cost. Secondly, there's the design and build. And thirdly, there's the expertise of running these facilities. Approval to build an LNG facility in Yamal was granted in 2005, and the Russian authorities undertook a tender process whereby the 2 largest gas companies, Gazprom and Novatek, teamed up with overseas multinational companies to help them design, build and fund these production facilities. And Novatek teamed up with the French operator Total Energy and also the Chinese authorities. And as a result of that, they won the tender and started to build these facilities. Now, they didn't actually become operational until 2017. So it took 12 years from the initial concept to actually having some liquefied natural gas to be able to sell to other parties. And the total cost of building these facilities was $27 billion. And a lot of that was funded by Total and the Chinese authorities, and also, interestingly, the Belt and Road Initiative. And the final ownership structure of the Yamal LNG facility is 50.1% ownership for Novatek, 20% for Total Energy, 20% for the Chinese operator CNPC, and 9.9% for the Silk Road Fund. Now, interestingly, the French company Total, along with most other countries from the West, have now pulled out of Russia and written off all of their investment. And the challenge from Russia's point of view is, who are they going to find now to put up the cash to be able to build another facility? And that really does represent a massive problem from Russia's point of view. Firstly, for financing, and secondly, for making sure that they've got the expertise and the know-how to get these facilities to actually work. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because natural gas is a really important part of the Russian economy. It made up around 1/3 of all of the fossil fuel sales that Russia was making prior to its invasion of Ukraine. And the reason that it was so important to the Russian economy was twofold. Firstly, they were sitting on the largest supplies out of any country in the world, 24%. And secondly, over the last 30 or 40 years, natural gas became the fossil fuel of choice for a lot of countries around the world because it gives off less CO2 emissions than coal and oil. Now, prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, natural gas was seen as the way forward for Russia. They actually spent over $10 billion building a second pipeline called Nord Stream 2 directly to Germany to supply double the amount of gas. So in terms of the long-term plan, Russia was expecting to receive huge volumes of income for the continued sale of this gas into Europe. But what Russia obviously wasn't expecting was that following the invasion of Ukraine, the vast majority of countries in Europe turned around and said, actually, we no longer want to buy Russian gas. We're going to do things differently. Firstly, we're going to try and get LNG in to replace that gas. But over the medium to long term, we're going to now start using renewable energy rather than buying dirty fossil fuels. And as we've seen in today's video, year on year between 2023 and 2022, Russia has seen a 56% fall in the volume of pipeline gas that it's selling into Europe. And it hasn't been able to offset the loss of those volumes with increased sales to China because it doesn't have enough pipelines to be able to do that. It would have to construct more pipelines to be able to get anywhere near the volume that it was selling just to Germany through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. But the other problem that Russia is facing is that it hasn't been investing into its liquefied natural gas capabilities. Even though it's got the largest supplies in the world, it's only the fourth largest supplier of LNG, and the volume of LNG that Russia is selling is considerably smaller than the USA, Australia and Qatar. And that's actually quite embarrassing from Russia's point of view, because when you consider that Australia has a fraction of the natural gas supplies that Russia has, but it's utilising them really, really well. It's built those facilities, and Australia has done fantastically well in building its market share in China. And one of the other problems that Russia is now suffering from is that over the last 12 months, there has been a significant fall in the price of natural gas as countries decide that they no longer need it and they're going to do things differently. So what Russia is now experiencing is a combination of a fall in volume and a fall in price. And the bottom line impact of that on the Russian economy is really bad news. So the overall summary of today's video is that as a direct result of the invasion of Ukraine, Russia has lost a huge amount of volume sales of natural gas through pipelines. It hasn't been able to offset those losses by selling more liquefied natural gas because it doesn't have the ability or the capacity to be able to do that. And as time moves on and countries develop other ways of generating electricity, the demand for natural gas and LNG will fall. And that means that Russia won't be able to monetize all of its supplies that are sitting under the ground. So the bottom line impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine is that the once hugely valuable gas reserves that Russia is sitting on is now diminishing in value, and as time goes on, it's likely that that value will get smaller and smaller. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.